The crack of a palm against flesh echoed through the courtroom. Not just a sound, but a seismic shock that shattered the carefully constructed facade of justice. In an instant, the world witnessed Officer Bradley Keene, a man once shielded by a badge and a broken system, strike Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett mid-testimony. This wasn't just an assault. It was a detonation, exposing the rot beneath the surface and igniting a firestorm that would force a town and a nation to finally confront uncomfortable truths. He stood up in court, walked straight toward Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and slapped her mid-testimony. Cameras caught it. The room froze. And minutes later, the same system that once protected him turned on him with the whole country watching. You could hear a pin drop in the courtroom right up until the sound of that slap. It wasn't loud because of volume. It was loud because of what it meant. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, standing at the witness stand with a stack of papers in hand, didn't even have time to move. Her head snapped slightly to the side, a handprint blooming red on her left cheek. Officer Bradley Keene, standing just feet away, stood breathing heavy, like he had just broken free from a leash he had been tugging against all morning. For 2 full seconds, no one moved. The judge stared, stunned. A woman in the gallery let out a gasp so sharp it echoed. The prosecutor's pen rolled off the table unnoticed. Then chaos. 2 court officers lunged from opposite sides. Keene didn't resist. That was the eerie part. He just stood there, hands behind his back, as if he'd been expecting this moment all along. His jaw was tight, his eyes dead calm. "Get him out of my courtroom," the judge yelled, slamming his gavel, not once but 3 times. It didn't do much to calm the room. The air buzzed with disbelief. Jasmine Crockett didn't cry. She didn't fall apart. She turned her head, blinked once, and fixed her gaze on Keene as they pulled him away. A flicker of emotion crossed her face. Anger, yes, but beneath that, something else. Pity, maybe, but it was gone as fast as it came. A woman in a tan suit from the front row started yelling. "That's assault in a courtroom. Is this what justice looks like now?" A reporter pulled out his phone, already live streaming. One of the lawyers said, "She's a member of Congress, for God's sake." But that wasn't why people were rattled. It was because it could have been anybody. Officer Keene, once considered a local hero, had crossed a line no badge could shield him from. Now, the irony was thick. He was in court for civil rights violations, accused of harassing and roughing up a black teen during a traffic stop. Now, in front of the whole country, he had struck a black congresswoman while she testified in court. Jasmine stepped down from the witness box slowly, her expression unreadable. A court officer moved to guide her out, but she shook her head. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, voice steady but low. "We finished what we came here to do." The judge looked at her, visibly torn. "Congresswoman Crockett, I'm fine," she cut in. "He doesn't get to silence me." The room hushed again, not from fear, but from something else. Admiration, resolve, maybe even shame. The reporters were already texting headlines. "Assault in courtroom C," one whispered. "Keene finally snapped," said another. Cameras weren't allowed in this particular courtroom, but that didn't stop the images from forming. Everyone would remember it vividly. A bailiff stepped up to whisper something to the judge. He nodded slowly, then addressed the courtroom. "This court is now in recess. 10 minutes. No one stood up. Everyone just watched her. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her blazer, took a slow breath, and sat down. In the hallway outside, people were already on their phones, calling family, reporters, maybe even their bosses. It was like trying to explain a dream you hadn't quite woken up from. One court officer, older, white, quiet, walked up to Jasmine after she exited the courtroom briefly to collect herself. "Ma'am, I just want to say," he began, his voice gravelly, "what he did back there, I'm ashamed to wear the same uniform." She gave him a small nod. No words, just a flicker of acknowledgement. A teenage girl nearby, probably a high school intern, dressed in borrowed heels, watched the congresswoman like she was witnessing something she'd tell her grandkids about. But this wasn't the start of the story. Not really. The reason Crockett was in Tarry Springs that day ran much deeper than just courtroom testimony. Tarry Springs wasn't the kind of place most people outside of Texas had heard of. A working-class town with just over 17,000 residents, It sat tucked between dry stretches of farmland and aging industrial zones. Folks there prided themselves on tradition. Football on Fridays, church on Sundays, and silence when it came to problems that made outsiders look too closely. But silence couldn't bury everything. For years, complaints had trickled out. Allegations against the Tulare Springs Police Department, traffic stops that turned violent, missing body cam footage, harassment claims, and whispered threats. Most of it went nowhere. Victims who filed formal complaints found their jobs harder to keep, their tires mysteriously slashed, or their families suddenly under investigation. Then came one incident no one could ignore. 14-year-old Darnell Freeman was pulled over while biking home from a part-time job. The body cam video, accidentally uploaded to a public server, showed Officer Keene slamming the boy to the ground after a brief verbal exchange. Darnell's face was bloodied. His arm was broken. The boy kept repeating, "I didn't do anything." He wasn't resisting. That clip spread fast. News crews showed up. Civil rights lawyers started circling, but the case stalled. Local officials claimed the footage was inconclusive. They said Keene had been following protocol. That's when Jasmine Crockett stepped in. She wasn't from Terry Springs. She didn't have family there, but she'd been watching. And when she saw that footage, something in her clicked. Maybe it was the way the boy cried for his mother. Maybe it was the look in the officer's eyes, blank, practiced, like he'd done this a dozen times before and never thought twice. Whatever it was, she made calls, met with Darnell's family, connected them with legal support, and eventually the family filed a civil rights lawsuit, naming not just Keene, but the department and the city itself. That lawsuit led to this hearing. Jasmine had agreed to testify about the wider pattern of misconduct she had uncovered. She'd compiled statements, email records, and redacted internal memos that hinted at years of cover-ups. This wasn't just one bad cop. This was a system that had been sick for a long time and had learned how to hide it. The courtroom that morning had been packed, not because people expected drama, but because they wanted to see if the system would finally be forced to listen. Jasmine had entered calmly, but with purpose, hair neatly pulled back, dark navy suit, heels clicking softly on the tile. She shook hands with the attorney representing Darnell's family, smiled politely at the court clerk, and opened her binder with care. She didn't need to raise her voice. The weight of her words carried themselves. "Institutional neglect," she said at one point, pausing. "That's what this is. A culture of silence that punishes those who speak and protects those who harm." She turned to the judge, then added, "When justice only applies to the comfortable, we don't have law, we have theater." From the defendant's bench, Keene stared at her the entire time. He hadn't looked like a man unraveling. No trembling hands, no nervous twitches. He sat still, arms crossed, chin raised. But behind that stare was something that caught Jasmine's eye. Not fear, not guilt, something colder, disdain. Later, witnesses would say they noticed the way he clenched his jaw when she brought up past allegations, how his foot tapped when she mentioned missing footage, and how his lawyer never once touched his arm or whispered anything to him, not even when things got tense. Jasmine had just reached a section detailing how Keene had been involved in 7 separate excessive force complaints, none of which resulted in disciplinary action. She looked up from the paper to make eye contact with the courtroom. That's when he stood up, and less than 10 seconds later, he struck her. But Officer Keene didn't just lose control. He revealed something deeper about the system that had protected him all these years. Bradley Keene had been wearing the badge for 18 years. Not in Dallas, not in Austin, right there in Terry Springs. He started as a patrol officer, worked his way up, and for a while, people said he had a knack for reading a situation before it escalated. But the truth is, things did escalate often. Only they never seemed to land on his record the way they should have. Ask the right people in town, and they'll tell you Bradley had a temper. And not just the kind that flared under pressure. He was the type to hold on to things, carry grudges, talk low when he was angry, not loud. His threat wasn't the kind that came with yelling. It came with a cold smile and a promise that he knew how to make your life harder without leaving fingerprints. You didn't need to cross him. You just had to not show him the respect he believed he was owed. That's what made him dangerous. Over the years, several residents, mostly young, mostly black or Latino, filed complaints. Keene stopped them for vague reasons, called for backup when it wasn't needed, pushed boundaries during arrests. But somehow, every investigation hit a wall. Witnesses recanted. Paperwork got delayed. Supervisors said there wasn't enough to take disciplinary action. Internally, officers talked. One rookie cop who left the force just 6 months in told an independent journalist, "He wasn't the loudest guy in the room, but he made it clear if you challenged him, you'd regret it, and nobody upstairs wanted to deal with the fallout." Keene wasn't just protected, he was avoided. Still on paper, he looked clean. Promotions came slowly but steadily. He became a field trainer, then was put on special assignment to oversee traffic enforcement. That's where most of his complaints came from, routine stops that didn't feel routine to the people on the receiving end. One of those people was Darnell Freeman. It wasn't just that Keene hurt him, it was that he didn't flinch. The footage showed him walking away after the incident, radioing it in like it was just another part of his shift. His report claimed the boy resisted questioning, and that necessary force was applied. It would have been buried like the rest, except that video leaked. The pressure that followed pulled back the curtain on Keene's past. Internal memos started surfacing. Anonymous tips flooded the town's human rights coalition. One woman, Alicia Benavides, said Keene threatened to have her cousin deported after she questioned him about a ticket. Another man, Khalil Green, said Keene used to park outside his store at night just to remind him who's watching. And yet in court, he sat tall. When Jasmine Crockett entered that room, she knew who she was facing. She had reviewed the complaints, read the transcripts. She understood that this wasn't just about police brutality. It was about a man who believed himself untouchable, reinforced by years of silence and shrugged shoulders. What she didn't expect was how closely he watched her. Every word, every pause. When she mentioned Darnell's case, Keene leaned forward slightly. When she referenced his long-standing pattern of targeting vulnerable residents, his hands gripped the bench edge tighter. But the breaking point came when she read a line from a report submitted by a former officer. Keene often boasted that no one could ever prove a thing. "I write the reports. I control the story." The judge glanced up at that moment, likely sensing the tension. Jasmine continued, "This isn't about one man's bad day. It's about a culture that lets someone write their own version of the truth again and again without consequence." Then it happened. Keene stood, took 2 steps toward her, and with a quiet, restrained fury, struck her in front of the entire courtroom. Some say he knew exactly what he was doing, that it was the last show of dominance he had left. Others say he snapped, that something inside him couldn't take being exposed by a black woman on the witness stand, backed by a room full of people who weren't afraid of him anymore. Either way, he showed his hand, and this time, nobody looked away. But as Keene sat in handcuffs, the courtroom wasn't just shaken. It was fractured wide open, and now everyone had to choose a side. The room didn't just react, it split. In one corner, defense attorneys shouted over each other, one trying to salvage the hearing, another practically begging for cameras to be removed. On the other, people stood from their seats, some crying, others recording. All of them stunned into a kind of movement that wasn't quite panic but wasn't calm either. Judge Hanley pounded his gavel, red in the face. "This court is in recess until further notice. Everyone clear the gallery now." But no one moved. They were frozen in it. He was already in handcuffs. A court officer gripped each of his arms, and another held his shoulder like she was afraid he'd lash out again. But he didn't. He walked willingly, eyes scanning the crowd like he was still searching for someone to blame. Jasmine stood near the stand. She hadn't moved much either. Her cheek was visibly red, a thin mark blooming near the edge of her jaw. A medic approached. She raised a hand. "I'm all right," she said, firm, clear, and loud enough that everyone in the room heard it. The moment carried. An older man in the back row, possibly a retired judge, or maybe just someone dressed to look like one, whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." Never. The clerk, still visibly shaken, began packing up her materials with trembling fingers. One of the interns, who had been sitting near the jury box, was sobbing silently, both hands over her mouth. Another woman, part of the Freeman family's legal team, spoke into her phone. "He just hit her." "No," in front of everyone. "I don't know, maybe 20 people." Outside the courtroom, the hallway flooded fast. Reporters swarmed the corridor. Some had already started live streams. Others pulled quotes from people pouring out of the courtroom. One camera caught the exact moment Keene was escorted down the hall, still silent, still not showing a shred of regret. Jasmine exited quietly with 2 aides at her side. She didn't speak right away, but when a local journalist asked, "Congresswoman, are you pressing charges?" she turned, paused, and said, "That decision's already been made for me." It wasn't a soundbite. It was a statement, and it rang out louder than the slap itself. Their lawyer, Kendrick Mosley, pulled Jasmine aside. "Press is all over it," he said. "Networks want statements. News is out already. Keene assaulted a sitting member of Congress. They're talking federal charges." Jasmine exhaled, brushing a wrinkle from her blazer. "Good," she said. "Then let's make sure nobody spins it into anything less than what it was." Back in the courtroom, the bailiff handed over Keene's badge and sidearm to a state official. They logged it, sealed it in evidence bags. Keene didn't protest, didn't look back, but as they let him out the building, someone from the crowd, no one could quite place who yelled, "Now you know what it feels like." Security escorted Jasmine out through a side door. Outside, a crowd was already forming. Some were holding signs from previous protests. Others had just come to watch, but they were all waiting. As she stepped through the glass doors, cameras lit up, microphones shoved forward, reporters shouted over one another. "Do you believe justice will be served this time? Was this an act of racism or power? Are you safe?" Jasmine paused, looked directly into one of the cameras, and said, "I didn't come here today to be a victim. I came to testify, but now the story isn't just about Darnell Freeman. It's about what happens when we stop pretending the system works the same for everybody." But once the footage made it to the national networks, the courtroom chaos became something else entirely. A lit match in a room soaked with gasoline. The footage didn't need perfect angles or studio lighting. A grainy 14-second clip taken on a shaky phone was enough to blow the lid off. By nightfall, nearly every major news outlet had aired it. "Congresswoman assaulted in courtroom," the lower thirds read. Talk shows lit up. Primetime anchors held interviews with legal analysts, civil rights leaders, even retired judges who struggled to find precedent. On social media, it was wildfire. Hashtags like #JusticeForJasmine and #Handcuffs hit trending lists within hours. In cities across the country, protests reignited. Some were small, dozens of people outside local courthouses with signs. Others ballooned. In Oakland, over 600 marched with candles and posters showing Jasmine's marked face beside Darnell Freeman's. People weren't just angry. They were raw, tired, ready to say what they'd been holding in. This wasn't just about Jasmine or Darnell or Keene. It became a symbol of every story swept under the rug, every slap that didn't get recorded, every bruise justified on paper, but never in truth. The president issued a brief statement. "We must protect the dignity of our courts and those who seek justice within them." Not exactly thunderous, but more than some expected. But the strongest voice came from Jasmine herself. She stood in front of reporters on the Capitol steps less than 48 hours after returning from Tulare Springs. Dressed in gray, her cheeks still slightly bruised, she spoke calmly, but every word felt like it was etched in steel. "I didn't get hit because I said something untrue," she began. "I got hit because I told the truth that some people didn't want to hear." She took a breath, let it hang. Cameras clicked rapidly. "Officer Keene didn't just strike me. He struck every person who ever tried to hold someone in power accountable and got punished for it." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "We're done playing by rules that only protect the people who write them." The crowd behind her erupted. Calls for federal intervention flooded the Justice Department. Advocacy groups demanded a full civil rights investigation into the Tulare Springs PD. The city's mayor, who had long dodged questions about misconduct, issued a public apology and announced an internal review. But for many, it rang hollow. In Tulare Springs, things were boiling under the surface. The police union held a press conference, visibly shaken. Their spokesperson insisted that Officer Keene's actions did not reflect the values of the department and claimed he had been placed on unpaid leave. The term "fired" was carefully avoided. Meanwhile, in local shops and diners, the mood was divided. Some residents defended Jasmine. Others clung to old talking points, claiming outsiders were stirring things up. But even those trying to look away couldn't ignore the fact that the world was watching them now. And Darnell, he went from being a scared teenager hiding from reporters to a quiet symbol of why this all mattered. One photo made the rounds, a still from a video shot outside the courthouse, showing him holding Jasmine's hand as they walked to her car. No words, just connection. In a follow-up interview, he said, "She came here to speak for me, but she also showed me I can speak for myself." Not everyone responded with grace. Some networks invited former officers to justify Keen's behavior. A few hosts hinted Jasmine might have provoked him, which triggered an even bigger wave of backlash. That line didn't fly. Not this time. Meanwhile, Jasmine received thousands of messages, some hateful, most supportive. People sent handwritten letters, flowers, messages from survivors of police violence who said her stand gave them hope. She read everyone she could. But amidst the outpouring, there was one call she hadn't expected. It came from Keen's former partner, Officer Ray Winston. He had retired 2 years earlier and had remained silent through all the chaos. Now, on a live national broadcast, he sat across from a journalist and said, "I should have spoken up. I saw what he did to Darnell. I saw what he did to others, and we all stayed quiet because we thought the system would protect us. But now it's broken, and maybe that's a good thing." His voice cracked. The audience stayed silent. But if the country was ready to talk about the problem, there was still one thing left to prove. Would it actually do something about it? 3 weeks after the courtroom incident, Officer Bradley Keen stood in front of a different judge. Not as a witness, not as a law enforcement professional, but as a defendant in a criminal case. Ora onde jup suici, vris shakled, no badge, no veapon, no shield. He was formally charged with felony assault, obstruction of justice, and violating the civil rights of a federal official. The prosecutor didn't hold back. "We are not just prosecuting a slap," she said in court. "We are prosecuting the belief that violence can silence accountability." The courtroom was packed again, this time with more press than locals. Jasmine Crockett attended the hearing quietly. She sat in the third row, expression blank, no makeup to cover the healing bruise on her cheek. She didn't need to testify this time. Her presence alone said everything. What surprised many was the testimony of fellow officers. 2 of Keen's former colleagues stepped up off-duty, unprompted, and spoke about years of misconduct they had witnessed but never reported. One described a night when Keen slammed a man against a car for talking back. Another recalled seeing him tamper with a dash cam after a chase ended in unnecessary force. Their voices were tired but clear. For the first time, the blue wall had cracks in it. The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours. The verdict, guilty on all charges. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Journalists leaned over one another to get a clear shot of Keen as he was led into the transport van. He didn't speak, didn't look around. His eyes stayed down, locked on the ground like it might open and swallow him whole. But this story wasn't about watching him fall. It was about what came next. The Department of Justice launched a full investigation into the Tulier Springs Police Department, citing a long-standing pattern of racially biased policing and suppression of public complaints. Within months, 5 officers resigned. 2 captains were placed on administrative leave. Internal affairs was overhauled. A new oversight board made up of local citizens was established to review all use of force cases going forward. One small town forced to start over. Jasmine returned a few weeks later, not for a hearing, not for a headline, but to meet with Darnell and his family. They sat in the living room, no cameras, no microphones, just conversation. "People keep asking me how I stayed calm," she told Darnell's mother. "How did you?" she asked. "I stopped caring about being liked a long time ago," Jasmine replied. "I care about being useful." That night, the Freeman family hosted a neighborhood gathering in their backyard. Fold-out chairs, lemonade, music humming from a speaker by the fence. It wasn't a victory party, more like a moment to breathe, to pause, to remember what had been risked and what had been gained. As the sun went down, Jasmine stood with Darnell near the porch. "What are you thinking about?" she asked him. He looked out at the crowd, Neighbors laughing, cousins chasing each other, his mom talking to a local pastor. "I used to think if you spoke up, they'd come for you," he said. "But maybe they come for you either way, so you might as well speak." Jasmine smiled, that tired kind of smile that holds pain and pride at once. Exactly. The next morning, she boarded a flight back to D.C. Her work, as always, wasn't done. New bills to draft, new fires to put out. But something had shifted, not just in Tari Springs, not just in her, but in everyone who watched that courtroom video and didn't look away. She later said in an interview, "You don't always get to pick the moment. Sometimes the moment picks you." The question is, what are you going to do with it? Keen's sentencing came 4 months later. 8 years. No parole for at least 5. The slap heard around the country wasn't just a moment of violence. It was a catalyst, a raw and undeniable turning point that demonstrated the profound power of accountability and the transformative impact of courage. This story teaches us that silence is not protection. It is complicity, allowing injustice to fester. It reminds us that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, possesses an undeniable force, capable of shattering even the most entrenched systems of power. When individuals choose to speak up, even in the face of fear, and when a community decides to listen and demand change, the ripples can become a tidal wave, proving that justice, though it may come in pieces, is ultimately within reach for those brave enough to pursue it.